Welcome back to Hold Fast, where we have biblical truths for daily battles. My name is Kenny. I am the host of the podcast, and I mentioned on last week's episode that for the next few weeks, these episodes are probably going to be focused on following up from the sermons on Sunday, because we're doing a whole series called Beyond Sunday. And if you missed last week's episode, I would encourage you to listen to that, because it kind of sets up the sermon series, but also these podcast episodes. And one of the things that I said that's important for me to say here is that you don't have to listen to the sermons for these to benefit you. Matter of fact, in many ways, these podcast episodes will recap the sermon that I did. And so you don't have to have listened to the sermon for this to make sense. And also just take the ideas a little bit further. And so we talked about work this past Sunday, and we talked about how we can go beyond Sunday in our faith by viewing our work as worship, by viewing our work as an opportunity for discipleship. And I said that, you know, when I say work, I'm not just talking about the 9-to-5 jobs that you get paid for doing. I'm talking as well to even folks who are retired and may just have some projects that you're working on, some different things that you're involved in, whether it's in the community or even in your family, even around your house, whether you're a stay-at-home mom and you feel like all I'm doing is just picking up toys and cleaning and cooking and just getting things done and homeschooling and all of that is work. And I understand that there's still slightly different categories between somebody who goes to a job and gets paid for it and somebody who's doing something that's not necessarily being paid for. But I want us to think about our work, the things that we put our hands to, in the same category as an opportunity for worship. So, having said all of that, like I said, I want to sort of recap the sermon, but also go a little bit deeper into some of these ideas. I shared a quote that I said really struck me. And at first I thought it was kind of harsh, but I really think that it's true. And I think it holds up with the passage in Colossians chapter 3. J. Vernon McGee said, "If you're lazy on the job, you're not dedicated to Jesus Christ." If you are lazy in your work, if you're not working heartily as unto the Lord, if you're not working with sincerity and you're just either just doing barely enough to get by, or even you're making it difficult for the people that you work with or the people that you work for, and you really don't want to do anything, you're trying to get as much off of your plate as possible so that you don't have to do the work. If these kinds of things are your mentality, then you're not dedicated to Jesus Christ, he says. And what he means is you're being disobedient. You're walking in disobedience to Jesus, because Christ tells us in his word to work heartily as unto the Lord, to whatever we do it for the glory of God. And we can view our jobs as an opportunity for worship because of that principle, because we are told that whatever we do elsewhere, Paul says, even if you're eating and drinking, do that to the glory of God. So how do we do that? I think that's a concept that I want to sort of go a little bit deeper in that I didn't necessarily talk about in my sermon. But how do I do my job to the glory of God, right? Like, because it's one thing to say, I'm going to worship to the glory of God. I'm going to sing these songs to God's glory. I'm going to pray to his glory. I'm even going to just do discipleship to his glory. That seems obvious to us, but it's not so obvious how work can become worship. How can me filling out paperwork be an act of worship? How can me cutting grass be an act of worship? And it starts with the heart behind it, right? Who are you doing this for? Who are you hoping to please ultimately? So let's take filling out paperwork for an example, because that seems like such a tedious task, and you go out there, this is important, but there's not really much meaning behind it maybe. So how can I do that as worship? Again, who are you trying to please? By filling out that paperwork accurately and making sure that you do it to the best of your ability and with excellence, who are you hoping to please with that? The person whom you're providing a service for, your boss. You just want to make sure your boss doesn't get onto you for the mistakes that you've made. Or are you hoping that as the Lord watches you do that, he is pleased with you walking in obedience to him by doing that from your soul? That's what the phrase work heartily means. Work heartily as unto the Lord means work from your soul as unto the Lord. Everything you do it with excellence, do it with much effort, and make sure that you're doing it for God's glory. Another way that you can do these things, do your job, do your work for God's glory, is you're doing it with a thankful heart. It's so common for us to complain when we're on the job, right? We're complaining about how hard it is. Well, I like doing this part of my job, but I don't like this part. I don't like what time I have to show up, and I don't like dealing with these customers. And we can tend to complain a lot. We can find things very easily to complain about. First of all, I would say that complaining is something that is sinful for the Christian. Paul says, do all things without grumbling or complaining. So that's something that we need to check our hearts in. But also the counter to that is to live with thankfulness. So instead of complaining about the things in my job that I don't like, I'm going to be thankful that I have this job. I'm going to be thankful that God has given me the ability to do this job. Even if it's a job that I don't necessarily like in and of itself, or I don't feel like it pays enough or whatever, I can come up with all these complaints. But what if I approached it with a sense of thankfulness? What if I went to the Lord and said, Lord, I'm so grateful that you've given me this opportunity to put my hands to work, to provide for my family, to have something to set my mind and my efforts towards. I'm so thankful that you've given me the capacity, whether it's physically or emotionally or mentally, to be able to do this job. I'm grateful for that. And I'm not going to complain about the things that are hard. Matter of fact, in those hard times, I'm going to give you glory for allowing me to do this and allowing me to even endure the hardships of my job for the sake of working hard for your glory. That's how you can do your job to the glory of God. And, I think that this idea of excellence is really important here, because it's so common to just do enough to get by on the job, right? Just do enough to not get fired. But I really believe, based on this passage in Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 through 24, and other passages in the scriptures, I really believe that the Christian is one who seeks to do their work with excellence. You don't do just enough. Good enough should not be our mantra, right? We should want to do things well and do them to the best of our abilities and with as much excellence as possible. I believe that Christians in the workplace should be doing their jobs better than the people around them. And I understand that there's skill level involved here, and I'm not saying it's sinful if you're not the best employee in your company. I'm saying that's what you should strive for. And you shouldn't strive for that so that you can get recognition or raises or whatever. Those are good things. It's not bad to be recognized for good work. It's not bad to get a raise for your job. All those are good things, and they're even extra blessings that God will give to us. But your goal, once again, is I'm doing this with excellence because I want to please the Lord. These are all ways that you make work worship. These are all ways that you bring glory to Christ in worship. I mean, that's the idea behind even the verse that I shared earlier. I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:31. Hopefully I'm getting that reference right because I'm getting it off the top of my head. But Paul says, even if you eat or drink, do it to the glory of God, because you do it with thankfulness. You do it with a heart that wants to honor and worship the Lord. You don't overindulge in food and drink because God doesn't want you to do that. He wants you to honor him even when you eat and drink, and especially when you do your work. So work really is a form of worship then. Let's switch gears for the last little bit of this podcast episode, because I want to address something else that I don't think I really went deeply enough into in my sermon. So I talked about the fact that if you don't like your job, or you feel like your job is a toxic environment, or you don't like your boss, whatever, this isn't the job that you're really excited about. What do you do? And what I said is, it's not that you need a new job, you need a new heart. You need to make sure that you are approaching whatever job that is in front of you with the idea of it being worship, even if you don't necessarily like your job. So I want to, though, address this problem. I mean, what do you do, though, if you're in a job that you don't really like? You have a passion or a skill set in your life that you really want to use in your work, but you can't currently use that where you're at. Does that mean that just because you have this job, you're supposed to just kind of suck it up and just do it anyway? That's not what I'm trying to communicate. I hope that's not what came across if you listen to the sermon, because I think that it's a good thing to find a job that suits your passions and your giftings, right? I mean, God has wired you a certain way, and I think he's done that with a purpose. And one of the purposes for that, hopefully, is so that you can take those skills, you can take those passions, and you can apply that to your work. So I'm not making the suggestion that you are just meant to just stay at what you feel like is a dead-end job just because it just pays the bills and it is what it is. But what I am saying is, while you're in that job, even if you don't like it, even if there's a million reasons for you not to have it, while you're there, give it 110%. Make sure you do it with excellence. Make sure you work as you are worshiping the Lord, right? And I think sometimes you see people will, for example, give a 2-week notice and they'll go, well, I'm leaving this job anyway, so I don't really need to give my all into this. Even in those situations, you give everything you have to work heartily as unto the Lord in those situations. So it's not a bad thing. It can even be a very good thing to pursue another career or another job while you're in that. But make sure that you are working heartily as unto the Lord. And another comment on this, I think this is worth saying, especially with my generation and even the generation after me. We seem to have this idea that the only job we're supposed to have is one that just fulfills us in every way. And I think it's because we view work as something that's supposed to provide us fulfillment, when Christ is the one who provides us fulfillment. And so you're going to find fulfillment in your job, not necessarily because you found the perfect job, right? And it can be fulfilling to find a job like that, but your ultimate fulfillment is going to come from Christ. And so even if you're at a job that you would have never thought you would be in a million years, or it's not something that sort of fits you, you can find fulfillment there because you're going to find it in Christ. You're going to find it as you work in these ways that we've talked about, heartily as unto the Lord. That's how you'll find fulfillment in your job. But the idea that I'm not going to work if I'm not completely passionate about it, I don't think that's what we see in the scriptures. Again, yes, God's given you passions and gifts and skills that you should use for his glory, but don't. And some people have even taken it to the extreme of they just won't work at all until they find that perfect job. And I think that's the wrong mindset. We're meant to provide for the people of our household, especially if that's you and you've got a family. You've got people that you are supposed to provide for. So make sure that you're not making you're not only going to work jobs that you're just completely in love with. While that's a good thing and that's a good gift, and I do think you should strive to love your job, that's not necessarily the litmus test as to whether or not you should be working somewhere. I hope that makes sense, but that's just something that I have seen with people over the years, and I think we need to rethink that. We need to say that even in the most tedious, boring, quote unquote, meaningless job, though I don't think jobs are meaningless at all. But even if I think it is, I can find meaning and purpose here because I'm going to work as the Lord's called me to work, and I'm going to worship him as I do that. So those are just a few thoughts that I had that I realized I could go a little bit further and a little bit deeper on in the sermon. I want to say that throughout this series, if you are engaged in the sermons, if you're here on Sundays or you're watching them online or whatever, and you've got a question based on what I've said, send me the question. Send it to me Sunday, Monday, and if you send it before the Tuesday following the sermon, I will be able to get to those questions on the podcast that week. I'll try to make a note of that as well as I'm preaching so that people at MissionWay get that note as well. But I want this to be helpful. And like I said, even if you don't listen to the sermons, I want these to be beneficial to you. But I do think, of course, you can go a little bit deeper by watching the sermon or listening to it. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes for the episode if you missed that as well. But thanks as always for listening to this episode of Hold Fast. Lord willing, I'll be back next week with another episode, and we're going to be talking this week about our time. So this coming Sunday at MissionWay Church, we're going to talk about how we can steward our time for the glory of Christ and for discipleship. And then next week, I'll have a follow-up podcast to that topic, Lord willing. So thanks again. Hope you have a great week. God bless.